So, through his analysis, Teton argues that basically the going public era, we talked about going public in the presidency lectures, and the going public era has been, started with relatively recent times in the 20th century, starting with Woodrow Wilson, he argues. And this is important for a couple reasons. One, it really marks a shift in the presidency. And two, identifying with Wilson shows it more as a populist direction rather than any other reason or cause, which we'll get into in a minute. But a couple problems with the Teton analysis. And the first one is that he uses a sample of State of the Union addresses. He pulls, several of them, I think it's 50 or so in the article, and instead of the 200 and whatever there were at the time of the writing of this article, 213, 214, something like that. And he oversamples during the period he cares about, this sort of shift from Teddy Roosevelt to FDR. He oversamples during that time period to make sure he can really get at when the changes happened. In the next article we read, the Murphy article, I'm going to argue that there's no reason to sample. There's only, 220 of them or so. Why would you sample? Why not just take all of them, look at the years? The sample sort of gets at, why his numbers are not correct. And the second issue that we run into is his interpretation of the data. He looks at it and he sees sort of a change during the Wilson era. I'm not sure that's especially well founded. You can see in the graph right here there's a spike in 1914. But other than that, Wilson kind of sort of looks like every other president before him, at least during the traditional time period. Third, there's no real logical story. Wilson just became more populist, but why? During this traditional time period, the State of the Union was typically given just as a letter to Congress, and then maybe published in newspapers, but it was sent as a letter to Congress. It's important to remember that the Constitution says, he shall from time to time give updates to Congress on the State of the Union. It doesn't say there'll be a speech. It doesn't say he'll give the public an update. He just says, from time to time, he shall give the legislative branch updates. There would be no reason for Wilson to change it other than Wilson is just kind of a guy who likes to change things. In my article that we're going to look at in a second, I'm going to argue that no, there is a fundamental difference in how presidents do it, but it happens during the shift in media usage rather than just a personal shift from Wilson. It's a big debate we see in the presidency literature. Is the presidency about personal stylistic changes, or are there systematic patterns we can analyze? So that's what we're doing here. This was the Teton article. He looks at we and our, and he looks at length of the State of the Union. And he shows that there is a historical period, a traditional period, and a modern period in the presidency. He argues that that modern period begins with Woodrow Wilson, and he argues that's due to changes in going public and populism. So, that's the Teton article. We're going to wrap up this video, and we'll shift over to the Murphy article next.